Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our virtual Dirshu Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Hey. We'll be learning today Miras Hashem Daf Kuf Lamed Amud Aleph. We're continuing to learn Hilchos Yom Tov, and we begin today in the middle of Siman Tov Kuf Yud Beis, in the middle of Sif Aleph, on the top line of Kuf Lamed Amud Aleph. So just to recapture what we were saying since the beginning of Siman Tov Kuf Yud Beis, we had so far in the Mechaber and the Ramah three basic points. We're discussing the halacha of cooking or doing other malacha for a non-Jew on Yom Tov. So the first thing that the Mechaber told us was you're not allowed to cook or do other malacha for a nachri, for a non-Jew on Yom Tov. And we learned in the Mishnah Berurah that the Chazal learned this out from a pasuk. The pasuk says, Ach asher yeyachel l'chol nefesh, hu levado yeyaseh lochem. And the Gemara learns out, lachem v'loy lenachrim, lachem v'loy leklavim. You're allowed to do bishul and you're allowed to do other malachas for yourselves, but not for a non-Jew and not for animals. Then the Mechaber told you that based on this halacha, there's a halacha that you're not allowed to invite a non-Jew to join you at your Yom Tov meal on Yom Tov. And the reason for this is, even if you're going to serve him from the food that you already prepared for yourselves for Yom Tov, you're still not allowed to do this because we're afraid, since you invited him and you want to be mechabed him, you want to honor him, you want to treat him well, you might come to put up a separate pot of food for him. Now, to be marbe in your pot technically is not a problem, because to be marbe in your pot, you're even allowed to do litzarech chayil, because we say that it's tercha achas, and it improves all the food that's in the pot. So that technically wouldn't be a problem. But the Chachamim said you're not even allowed to do that. You're not even allowed to be marba for him in the same pot. Why? Because we're afraid that you might come to put up a separate pot for him. Then the Ramah told us that while you're not allowed to invite some non-Jew over to join you in your house at your Yom Tov meal, you're allowed to send him food on Yom Tov to his house. But you can only do that from the food that you already prepared for yourself. You're still not allowed to be marbeh for him in your pot. You're not allowed to go ahead and cook extra to send it to the non-Jew on Yom Tov. And again, it's for the same reason. We're afraid that once you have in mind that you're going to be marbeh for the nachri, that you're going to add to your pot for the nachri, you may come to then put up something special for the nachri. You have in mind that you're going to be marbe in your pot for the nachri, then you're going to say, you know what, I remember he likes potato kugel, I'll make him a special potato kugel. So now it's no longer tercha achas, now you're being matriach only for the nachri. That you're not allowed to do. That brings us to the top of Kuf Lamed Amud Aleph, where the Mechaber says, Aval avdoi v'shivchasai. If you're not dealing with Stam Nachri, if you're dealing with your Eved, you have an Eved Kanani, a Shivcha Kananis, or like the place can say, this doesn't mean necessarily the halacha of an Eved Kanani and the halacha of a Shivcha Kananis. Maybe you have non-Jewish employees. You have a live-in. So you have a non-Jewish employee that is by you for Yom Tov. Aval avdoi v'shivchasai, if you have an Eved, if you have a maid. Or somebody, a non-Jew, showed up at your door, he was sent to you to deliver something or whatever it is, and now he's here. Or you have a nachri, you have a non-Jew who you didn't invite him, and he just showed up at your house. Now, in all of these cases, we're not so concerned that you might come to put up a separate pot of food for these individuals. These are not individuals that you invited to your home and you want to be mechabed them. You see, that's the problem. The problem is that when you invite somebody to your home, so that means you invited him, you want to be mahana him, you want to be mechabed him. So then we're worried you might come to put up a new pot of food for him. But in these cases, your eved, your shivcha, a shliach, a delivery person that wound up at your home, or a non-Jew who walked in on you and you didn't expect him and you didn't invite him, in those cases, the Mechaber says, we're not so concerned that you might come to put up an extra pot for them. So in those cases, the Mechaber says, Mutter laha'achila imai. In those cases, you're allowed to let him eat with you from the food that you already prepared for yourselves for Yom Tov. You still can't be marbe for him, because once you go ahead and decide to throw in some more food for him, now we're afraid then you might come to put up a separate pot for him. So you still can't be marbe for these people, but you can have food for them and you can invite them to come eat with you, and we're not afraid that that means you're going to go ahead and put up extra food for them. So mutar lahachila imoi v'loy chayshinon shema yarbe b'shviloi, and we're not afraid that you're going to go ahead and put up another pot of food for them. That's what it means. We're not afraid you're going to go make extra food now specifically for them. Haga, I'm going to go straight into the Ramah, because in the Mishnah Berurah we're going to see exactly what this Ramah is doing to the Mechaber. Like the Mishnah Berurah is going to point out, what the Mechaber just did was he lumped the law, the din, of Avdai, Shivchasai, and a Nachri Habame Elav, and the Shliach Shenishtalach Loi, he lumped all of these together. And the Mechaber makes it sound like all of these people have the same exact halacha. Now the Ramah is going to point out that they don't all have the same exact halacha. Haga, the Ramah says, Umuter laharbois bishvil avdai v'shivchasai ba'oise kedera shemevashel ba la'atzmai. There's a difference over here. By your eved, by your shivcha, in those cases, those people that live by you, your employees, your eved, your maid, you're allowed to add to your pot of food for them. You're allowed to be marbe in one pot. You're putting up a big stew for the Yom Tov meal. You could put in extra for your eved and your shivcha. Aval l'sha'ar kutim b'chol inyan aser. But for another non-Jew, let's say the non-Jew who just walked in on you, you have Tony, your non-Jewish co-worker, who just walked in on you on Yom Tov. So now you want to say, oh, I'm making a stew, I'll throw in extra for Tony. That you're not allowed to do. For your Eved or for your Shivcha, you're allowed to do it. But for the Stam non-Jew who walked in from the street, over there you are not allowed to do it. Now let's take a look. This is a mouthful that we said over here. Now let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. Let's start with Ois Cut and Tess. Avdoi v'shivchasai v'chein shliach v'chein kuti. Explains the Mishnah Berurah. Tedavka kishamezamein ha'akum etzloi. It's only the halachas that we learned yesterday when we said that you're not allowed to invite the non-Jew to eat with you, even from the food that you already prepared, because we're afraid you might come to put up a special extra pot for the non-Jew. That halacha only applies to dafka kishamezamein ha'akum etzloi. That's only when you invited the non-Jew to join you, because in that case, the chafetz bikarei. Over there, it's very obvious that you want to be mechabed him. That's why you invited him. You invited him because you want to be mechabed him. Then chayshinon shemeyarbe b'shviloi levashel b'gdeira levava. That's when we have a concern, since we see you want to be mechabed him, we're concerned that you might come to put up a special pot of food for him. Masha'en kein ba'avdoi v'shivchasai. But by your eved and by your shivcha, or by Tony, the coworker who just happened to walk in on you, and you didn't invite them, then we're not concerned that you might put up an extra pot of food for them. You weren't looking for this. You didn't ask for this. You didn't invite them. So why should you go out of your way to put up a special pot of food? It's only when you invite them. Yesterday's halacha. When you invited the non-Jew, that's when we have this concern. If the non-Jew showed up on his own, says the Chavetz Chaim, Afim hu adam chashuv. Even if this non-Jew that walked out and walked in on you happens to be an adam chashuv, maybe he's a municipal employee. I don't know. Maybe you have a state assemblyman, the district attorney lives down the block from you, and you happen to be friendly with him, and he walked in. So now you're dealing with an adam chashuv. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Afim hu adam chashuv, kevan shaloi hisminoi lavoi. Since you didn't invite him, we're not concerned, right? Because that's the theme over here. The Mechaber is telling you the non-Jew showed up on his own. We're not concerned that you might put up a separate pot. Says the Chavetz Chaim, even if he's an adam chashuv. However, the Chavetz Chaim says, the dafka sheba achar shekvar hechin seudasai. But this halacha only applies if the non-Jew showed up after you already prepared your Suda. then we're not afraid that you might come to put up something special for the non-Jew. But if the non-Jew shows up after your Suda is already prepared, now the non-Jew walks in, and if you decide you want to serve him food, you might not have enough. Now I have to put up more food. Well, now you're putting up more food for the non-Jew on Yom Tov. Not allowed to do that. So this halacha that you're allowed to have him eat with you if he showed up on his own, that's only if you already prepared your food for the Suda. Now the Chavetz Chaim tells us that there are those that disagree with this halacha of the Adam Chashuv. The Yesh Cholkin, there are those who disagree. Ta'akati imhu Adam Chashuv, v'roya l'chavod, if the person who showed up on his own is an Adam Mechubad, if he's a significant person, and you want to be mechabed him, then we do have to be concerned that you might come to be marbe, you might come to put up a separate pot for him. Ella, rather, if you want this non-Jew to join you for the meal, you have to say to him before you give him any food, if it's our holiday, if it's okay with you that we'll serve you from what we already have on hand, then you could come and eat. Otherwise, we're concerned you might be marbifer. Okay, so here we have two shitas. We have one shita that says doesn't matter if he's an Adam Chashuv. Even if he's an Adam Chashuv, since you didn't invite him, we're not concerned that you might be marbifer for him. Now we have the Yesh Cholkin that says not so simple. If he's an Adam Chashuv, we have to be concerned that you might be marba for him, and therefore you have to speak out specifically, I'm inviting you to join us if you're okay with what we already have on hand. The Taz is machriya halacha l'maisa, the imba me'elav, that if this person showed up on his own, Yisroel Weiss, and the Yid wants to give him food to eat, bali hazmana, without an invitation, v'haftsara sheyochal etzloi, and the Yid is not saying to the non-Jew, oh, please come join us. Come on, you have to eat lunch with us. If you're not doing that, then mutter, then you could allow him to eat with you. Because then we're not afraid that you might be marbe. But if the Yid is turning to the non-Jew and he's saying, oh, please, I'll pull up a chair. Come, you got to join us. No, you can't go anywhere. You have to eat lunch with us. Then, even though the guy showed up on his own, nevertheless, since it's very clear that it's important to you that he should eat with you, then we have to be afraid that you might put up a separate pot for him, and then it's awesome. What's the difference if you invited him on Erev Yom Tov and you called him up, or you sent him an invitation in the mail, or he showed up by you on Yom Tov and you said, please, you must eat with us? Either way, you showed that it's important to you that he should eat with you. Once you showed that it's important to you that the non-Jew should eat with you, then we have to be chayshish that you might be marbe b'shvila. Okay, now Ois Katan Yud Aleph. Now the Chavetz Chaim turns to the words of the Ramah. The Ramah said, you're allowed to be marbe, you're allowed to put more food up for your eved and your shifcha in the pot that you put up for yourself. Now this means even before it's on the fire. You're allowed to cook more for them. Explains the Chavetz Chaim, like I pointed out, the mechaber seemed to imply that the same din applies to the eved, the shivcha, the guy that showed up on his own. They all have the same din. And now the Ramah is coming to explain that that's not really the case. Now, I'm being medayik in the words in the Mishnah Berurah. The Chavetz Chaim writes that the Ramah came lefaresh, to explain. That sounds to me like the Mishnah Berurah is telling me that the Ramah is not disagreeing with the Mechaber. It's not that the Mechaber held differently and the Ramah is arguing. It sounds like the Ramah is explaining what the Mechaber meant. Ubaha Ramah lefaresh, the Ramah is coming to explain sheyesh chiluk beinayim, that the din of the Eved, the Shivcha, and the non-Jew who shut up on his own are not the same. The Ba'avdai v'Shivchasa, you buy your Eved and your Shivcha. Afilu im marbe b'kteirasai lechatchila b'shvilam shari. Your mamish allowed to put up more food. You could say to yourself on Yom Tov, oh, should I make a 3-pound minute roast? No, I have Anna and Tony are here. I need more food. All right, I'll put up a 5-pound roast. So lichatchila, you're going ahead, even though I should be careful what I say. See how careful you have to be? In the next line, the Chavetz Chaim is going to say that you're not allowed to speak out that you're doing it for the non-Jew. So cross out what I just said. You're not going to verbalize it. But you could say, you could think to yourself, which roast should I take? Should I take this one or that one? You could think to yourself, how many people do I have? I have me and my wife and the 3 kids, and Scott, Ann, and Tony. Okay, I'm going to take the bigger roast. So your mamish, you're being marbe for the non-Jews, but you're doing it b'kedera achas. You're doing it in one tircha, in one pot. So over there, you're allowed to do that. Kevan dechad tirchahu, since it's one tircha. And let's remember that also the more meat you put up, the more tasty all the Yom Tov meat is. So you have both requirements here. It's tircha chada, it's one tircha, and it's going to be mashpiach, it's going to improve what's going to be in the pot. And we're not worried that once you think to put up a bigger minute roast, because you have the Eved and the Shivcha here, you might go put up a separate pot of food for the Eved and the Shivcha. You're not so concerned about the Eved and the Shivcha that you're going to come to put up a separate pot of food for them. But by the Eved and the Shivcha, if you want to be marbe in your one kedera, if you want to put up a pot of beef stew, and you want to put up more for them, that you're allowed to do. However, you should not verbalize that you're being marbe for them. But with a non-Jew who just shows up on his own by your door, but he's still somebody you're on friendly terms with and somebody who you want to be nice to, then you're only allowed to feed him from what you already prepared for yourself. But to add food for him, so he showed up an hour before the Suda, and you were putting up food, and you said, you know what, I'll put up a little bit more food because Tony is here. You're not allowed to do that. Then it's also because you were afraid you might put up a separate potato kugel for him. So that you're not allowed to do. So that's the difference between the Eved and the Shivcha and the guy who showed up on his own. Ice cutting your days. For the Eved and the Shivcha, you could add ba'isa kedera. When you're putting up a pot of food, you could put up more food in the pot for the Eved and the Shivcha. Points out the Chavetz Chaim, the dafka bebas achas techad tirchu. But that's only, you're putting up a pot of beef stew, you could decide to put up more beef stew than you otherwise would have for the Goyisha Eved and the Shivcha, because that's chad tircha, you're putting up one beef stew. But if after you already put the beef stew on the fire, now you want to add more meat to the beef stew for the Goyisha Eved and the Shivcha, that you're not allowed to do because that's a new tircha. That you can do. Even though by putting in more meat in the pot, you're increasing the flavor of all the Yom Tov food, still, you're not allowed to go ahead and do it if it's a separate tircha. Now, what's interesting over here is that if back in Siman Tov Kuf Gimel, I remembered that we had a very interesting Berurah halacha. The Berurah halacha in Tov Kuf Gimel, in Dibur HaMaskil Avo Mimala, what he says over there is, when you're doing one tircha, we said if it's one tircha, so then you're allowed to put more food up in the beef stew, even if you're doing it for the weekday. You're allowed to put up a bigger beef stew because it's chad tircha and it improves the flavor of everything in the pot. No problem. The Berurah halacha over there said sometimes it's mutter even if it's more than one tircha. Sometimes you're allowed to be marbe. Sometimes, even after you put the pot on the fire, you're still allowed to add meat to the pot because it adds flavor to the whole pot. But that's only when that's why you're doing it. In other words, if you already put up the beef stew, and now you look at the pot and you say, it's not so meaty, it's not going to be so rich, but I don't need any more meat. but I want to add meat anyway because I want to improve the taste. Then you're allowed to add meat even after it's on the fire, even though it's a new tercha, because it's improving all the Yom Tov food. But that's not the case over here. Over here, you already put the beef stew on the fire. Now the non-Jew showed up. Now you want to do a new tercha. You want to add new meat to the stew, not in order to improve the flavor. You want to do it for the non-Jew. Then you're not allowed to do it, even though it happens to be it will improve the flavor. But that's not why you're doing it. You're doing it for him. So you're not allowed to do it. Okay. So I'm just going to start reading again from the beginning of Weiss Cut and Yud Beis. You're allowed to add to the pot for the Eved and the Shifcha, V'dafka b'basachas techatirchu. That's only when you're making the whole pot in one shot. You could make more for the Eved and the Shifcha. But to add meat to the pot after it's already on the fire, your wife reminds you that you have Anna and Tony. You want to go add meat to the pot that you're not allowed to do because you're doing it for them. Ella, with the exception of what you could do with the shtickle harama, what you could do is you could say, I don't really need to add more meat to the pot. I really have salami. I could really give them salami sandwiches. So and they'll be happy with salami sandwiches. I could give them salami sandwiches. All right, now I could go add more meat to the pot because I'm not necessarily giving it to them. I might give them salami sandwiches. So then the meat that I added to the pot could be for the Israelim. So then the meat that I put in the pot, maybe we're all going to eat it. Maybe Anna and Tony are going to eat salami sandwiches. And then once you already added meat to the pot, you could give it to them to eat. It's a harama. When it comes to the preparing of bread, the Achronim conclude, and we've had this concept already before. When it comes to making challah, each challah is a separate tercha. You have to braid it individually. You have to put it in the oven individually, take it out individually. So then, you can't increase loaves of bread for the non-Jew Eved and Shivcha, unless you have this same ha'arama. Maybe you'll say, I don't really need extra bread for them. I have frozen bagels in the freezer. I'll take out the bagels. I'll give them the bagels. Then you could add bread because maybe the Yidden will eat all that bread. Once you bake the bread, you can give it to them. Well, if you have mavur le'el b'simin tafkov zayin sivav, kol heter apas enoy kiyim batanurim shalahem. The whole heter of baking extra challahs, extra bread on Yom Tov that you don't need, is only in the types of ovens that they had then, where by filling up the oven, all the bread tasted better. Aval batanurim shalanu, with our ovens, it doesn't really work that way. Even for Yidden, you really only are supposed to bake what you need. It doesn't mean that you have to go take a poll of all the family members and ask them exactly how many slices of challah they're going to eat. You could approximate and say, for the family, this is what I need. Okay, now we go to Sif Beis. Says the Mechaber, B'nei hachayil shel kutim, the infantry, an army division of the non-Jews, shenosdu kemach shelahem liyisrael lefeis lehem pas. Sometimes what would happen is an army division would be moving through the town, and they don't have field kitchens with them. So they have raw supplies, and what they would do is they would knock on your door, and they would give you a 25-pound sack of flour, and they would say, we need you to bake 25 loaves of bread for the soldiers. Here's the flour, go bake. So what happens if they come on Yom Tov? They give you flour to bake bread. If they're not makpid, if you tell them, look, no problem, do you mind if I give a small roll to my kid, after I bake it? And they say, sure, no problem. Then then we have again a shtickle ha'arama over here. If they don't mind, if you take a roll, you make a bilkala and you give it to your kid, then you could go ahead and you could bake for them. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut good. Gimel noisen mimenu latinoik. Yesh be'achronim shekasvu. There are those achronim that write The loishari that this is not mutter ela in keinois and mamish lechel. You have to give the tinuk a bilkala. V'loya yedesha yochel litein. It's not just that they would let me give the tinuk, therefore I'll bake everything and give it all to them. No, you actually have to give the tinuk a bilkala. Mutter is cutting your dollar, then mutter lefais, then you're allowed to bake for them. Shaharayim lo yoifek ala pasla yuchal litein letinuk af pasecha. The reason you're allowed to bake all 25 pounds on the smach that you're going to give the tinuk one bilkala is because the only way you have the right to give the tinuk a bilkala is by baking all 25 pounds of flour. That's what they told you. They gave you a 25-pound sack of flour, and they said, use it all and bake bread. Can I give the kid a bilkala? Yes, you can. But you can't just take flour, bake a bilkala, and give it to the kid and give them back the flour. They'll shoot you. So you can't do that. So the only way you could give the kid the bilkala is by baking all 25 pounds. So now all the baking that I did was only the tzarich of the tinuk to give the tinuk that bilkala. And also, we don't know exactly which role is going to go to the kid. So then every tircha that I do, every bilkala that I braid, I could say this might be the one for the tinuk. The kasvach, right? It's not only if they come and they give you 25 pounds of flour. Sometimes what they do is they come knocking on your door and they say it's your turn to provide bread for the troops. You take your 25 pounds of flour and you bake. But what they do is they say 25 pounds. And you want to bake one for the kid? You can bake one for the kid. But we are what's the word I'm looking for when they come and they take it? We are, the English word just fell out of my head. Confiscating. We are confiscating 25 pounds of your flour on behalf of the soldiers. You want to bake one for the tinuk from the 25 pounds? Go ahead. But again, without baking one for the tinuk, you can't use any of it. You're allowed to bake lahem for them, ayin betaz, and finally here's the punchline of this sif, ayin betaz. The Berurah says, take a look at the taz. Shekasav writes, de'ein lismay chal kula zu denesinas pas latina de'ein lismay chal kula zu denesinas pas achas. This whole kula that you're going to bake the 25 pounds of flour over here for all of the soldiers based on the one bilkala that you're going to give to the tinuk, you can't be saimach on this kula. Only in this case, obviously, we're dealing with a major shasat chak where the army knocks on your door and demands that you bake. Okay, we're going to stop over here. So this marks the last shir for the year. And now we go tomorrow to Erev Rosh Hashanah, Erev Yom Adin. What can I say? It's been a rough half a year for sure. And we have to turn to the Rabbeinu Shalom and we have to be mispawel. And I would give a word of advice. I gave a shir last night. My Tehillim shir fell out last night on Kapitel Chaf. Lamnatseach mizmar leDavid yancha Hashem b'yom tzara yisagev Hashem elikei Yaakov. Very, very interesting kapitel. It's the first kapitel. I'm not prepared to say how it compares to every other kapitel in Tehillim at this moment, but definitely it's the first one that we see that's not written in the first person. There's debate amongst the Rishonim who the mechaber of this kapitel is. There are those Rishonim that say that David HaMelech was saying this tefillah on behalf of Yoav ben Tzruya. We know that later in David HaMelech's life, Klal Yisrael they weren't comfortable allowing David HaMelech to go out to war. David HaMelech was too valuable. They couldn't risk him. So they told him, you stay behind in Yerushalayim and you be mispal for us. We'll go out to Milchama. So David HaMelech was sending Yoav ben Tzruya and the army out to Milchama, and he was mispal on behalf of Yoav ben Tzruya and the soldiers. Yancha Hashem b'yom tzara. The Rabbeinu Shalom should answer you. The Rabbeinu Shalom should answer you b'yom tzara. There are others that say fakert. There are others that say that this is a tefillah that Klal Yisrael said on behalf of David HaMelech when David HaMelech was going out to Milchama, and David HaMelech was far away from Yerushalayim, and they said Yancha Hashem b'yom tzara, and then Yisagev Hashem l'kei Yaakov Yishlach Ezracha mikodesh. Even though you're far away from Yerushalayim, the Rabbeinu Shalom should send you help from the Kodesh. What does that mean? From the Heichel, from the Beis Hamikdash. Even though you're far away from Yerushalayim, the Rabbeinu Shalom should send you the help from the Heichel. But in either case, this is a tefillah that somebody said on behalf of somebody else. Now we have the Gemara in Baba Kama. The Gemara in Baba Kama says, somebody who's mispalel, v'hu tzarech la'isai davar. Somebody who's mispal ba'ad chaveroi. He's mispal for his friend, v'hu tzarech la'isai davar. And he himself needs the same thing that he's requesting on behalf of his friend. Hu nano tchila. He, the one who's being mispal for his friend, will be answered first. And there's a beautiful Rabbunim Mipshischa who says, why is that? Because the one who's being mispal is willing to forego his opportunity to daven for himself, and instead he's davening for his friend. And that's such a yesod in Yiddishkeit. A person, in order to be a true Yid, in order to be Mekayim Torah mitzvahs properly, a person has to be able to look outside of himself. If a person is stuck always looking at his own immediate personal needs, very hard for him sometimes to be Mekayim Torah mitzvahs properly. You want me to spend $300 on a lulav and esrog? I need the money. But if you're willing to look beyond yourself, you look and you say, I want to be Mekayim the Torah Kedusha, and I want to do it behidur, so I'll go spend the money. Same thing, a person has to be able to look outside of himself. He has to be willing to be mispal for somebody else, not for him. So mida keneged mida, when somebody's willing to look beyond himself, then the Rebbeinu Shalom takes care of him. So he's nana tchila. When we come to the Rebbeinu Shalom on the Yom Adin Ayam V'Neira, we come to be mispal to the Rebbeinu Shalom on Rosh Hashanah. We have so much to ask for. But let's not get lost, Rabbi Say, in just asking for our own personal needs. Let's have Klal Yisrael in mind. Let's have all the Yidden in mind. Everybody, b'chol makom shehem. And we shouldn't only be mispal that Yenim should have parnasa, and Yenim should have gesund, and Yenim should get a shidduch. Those are all important, and they're all things that we should have in mind, and we should be mispal for. But let's be mispal for the bigger picture. Let's be mispal for Klal Yisrael, that the Rebbeinu Shalom should bring Mashiach Tzidkenu. The Rebbeinu Shalom should bring the Geula Shlema. The Rebbeinu Shalom should bring us to Yerushalayim HaKodesh, to the Beis HaMikdash. The Rebbeinu Shalom should be Mashre Shechinasai B'Seichenu. That's the only way we're going to get it right. That's the only way we're going to have a world that's going to be able to fulfill its tafkid. That's the only way we're going to have a life that's going to be the way it's supposed to be. Like I said last night, we speak about Taryag mitzvahs. Taryag mitzvahs, 613 mitzvahs. How many of them could we really be Mekayim? How many of them are Kodshim? How many of them are Negea to the Beis HaMikdash? How many of them are Negea to Tumah and Tahara? How many of them are mitzvahs hatluyos ba'aretz? How many of them are mitzvahs hatluyos b'Sanhedrin and Bezdin? There are so many mitzvahs that we can't be Mekayim. We're living b'di'evid, Rabbi say. The whole life, the whole chayim is b'di'evid. It's all b'di'evid. Everything that we're living day in, day out is b'di'evid. Is it any question that there are so many tzaras? Is there any question why there's so much suffering? Is there any question why there's so much difficulty? Because we're living a life of b'di'evid. You have to be mispal to the Rebbeinu Shalom. Pay attention to slichas. Look at the slichas and you'll see that this is a recurring theme throughout slichas about Klal Yisrael and Golus and how we're mispal to the Rebbeinu Shalom that he should be making me offer dal me ashpais yarim evyoin. The Rebbeinu Shalom should bring us back to the way we're supposed to be. The Rebbeinu Shalom should bring us back to Yerushalayim HaKodesh. The Rebbeinu Shalom should bring us to Beis Hamikdash. He should be mashresh chinasai b'seichenu. We should be zeichet to see that the Rebbeinu Shalom should be melech al kol haaretz. B'yayim ahu yiyeh Hashem echad u'shmai echad. Rabbi Isai, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to teach Torah. It's a highlight of my day, and I could only do it because I know that you're out there, even though I can't see you, but I know that you're out there, and it gives me tremendous nachas when I see that the shiurim get used. Thank you so much. Like I write every day, thank you so much for joining me for Limud HaTorah. The schus of Limud HaTorah should stand ganz Klal Yisrael in good stead. Everyone should have a ksivah, tova, good gebenched yar. Be well.